What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Let's Talk MMA podcast. I hope you guys are having an amazing one. What have I been doing in the last few days? Well, I've been playing a new game. I've been playing basketball a lot outside. Can't shoot for nothing, but very good at getting rebounds and passing the ball and playing defense. Those track days really coming back in handy. But once like a 6'5" guy steps onto the court, there's barely anything you can do. And the game I've been playing is Destiny 2. I picked up that. It's been pretty fun. I do want to play some Elden Ring though. I never even beat the core game. I know the DLC came out and stuff, but I've been thinking about streaming it on my other channel. But what's been going on in MMA? I saw an MMA fight where a fighter tried to tickle his way out of a triangle choke. Inverted triangle choke. Some people ask, does tickling work? And of course it doesn't, because the adrenaline is just rushing too much. And it's only going to make the submission much worse for yourself, because if you're in a triangle choke and you're spending time trying to tickle your way out of it instead of using technique, you're wasting precious seconds that you need to get out of there, because every single second in a submission counts. They're all very dire, you know? You don't want to waste any time doing something like tickling your opponent. Learn the technique and get out of there. What if they don't know the technique? Then that fighter really didn't stand a chance even in the beginning. And I still remember the interview with Bas Rutten, and he said like those ninjas came into his dojo or his gym. I don't know how many of his stories are actually true, because they're just all insane. Sounds like they're all from some kind of movie. But apparently these ninjas came into his gym and they challenged him that they could survive a rear naked choke by going for his eyes. So instead of using technique to get out of the choke, they would instead attack his eyes. And then when Bas Rutten put him in the rear naked choke, he told them, if you get anywhere near the eyes, I'm going to snap your neck. They didn't want to go with it. And it's like a similar kind of mentality. Like, people think like there's these different kind of methods other than pure technique that you have to learn in the gym. They're trying to like shortcut their way, thinking that they could beat these fighters, and they just don't work, man. You can't go for the eyes in that kind of scenario. Even if they do and they damage the fighter's eyes, he's still not going to let go. You're still going to go to sleep, or in Bas Rutten's case, he will snap you. And I know someone who thinks like this too. We were talking to one of my friends once, and he was saying if we put him in a rear naked choke, he would reach around and squeeze your balls, right? That's what he was saying. He would squeeze you down there, which is sus in itself, but you know, that's like your first instinct or first decision is to go for the groin. Like, that kind of technique is just not going to work. You leave your neck exposed, and even if you're trying to reach around and give him a reach around, the fighter in this instance is going to capture your arm in the position as well, so it can't move either. I think my friend actually changed his mind on all of it after he started watching more MMA, and he started to respect grappling a lot more. Charles Oliveira specifically is the one who showed him how dangerous and effective Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu actually is. Oh, and on Joe Rogan's podcast, Joe went out and said that Ilia Topuria has cleaned out his division. He said, after Max Holloway, there's nothing left in the weight class. I did not know Josh Emmett and Volkanovski were the whole featherweight division. Topuria has a lot more opponents to fight after Max Holloway, and if he beats Max, which is a big if, it's a competitive fight, I think the best fight of the year, he still has to fight Brian Ortega, Movsar Evloev, maybe even Aljamain Sterling. If Diego Lopez gets much better and rises the rankings. I mean, the guy doesn't even have a single title defense yet. How do you clean out the division without a title defense? And he didn't do what Max did on his way up to the title. He didn't beat multiple different top contenders, right? And Max's come up to the championship, he was really cleaning out the division. So that was absolutely wild for Joe to say. I understand he does a podcast all the time, and you say certain things that you look back and you just completely disagree with it. That happens all the time. Oh, and they just announced the UFC 306 card for the Sphere, and that card is going to go head to head with Canelo Alvarez on Mexican Independence Day. So let's see here. The main event is Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili. As we knew, that was reported by Ariel before. I thought a better main event would have been Topuria versus Holloway. Now, it would be strange to have a Spaniard main event a card that was supposed to be for the Mexicans, but if there's a card to go head-to-head with Canelo, with any available champion, Topuria versus Max was probably going to be the best to sell as many pay-per-views as possible, you know? O'Malley versus Merab, though, it's a good fight. The co-main event is Grasso versus Shevchenko 3, of course. Then we got Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopez. They're going to run that fight back. It's a great fight, only if Ortega actually shows up. They're about to have Dan Ige in the wings again, waiting to jump off the couch. Can you imagine Ortega pulls out again and Lopez has to go up against Dan Ige in a rematch? I do think, though, in a 5-rounder, Dan Ige would have won that fight. So, good fight. Then we have Daniel Zellhuber versus Esteban Ribovitz. That's on the main card. Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Ode Osborne is opening up the main card. Okay. Manuel Torres versus Ignacio Bahamondes is a great fight. That's going to be the featured prelim. Low-key, one of the best fights on the entire card. I'd probably even say could even be the best fight on the card. That's how good it is. If you know, you know. And Renan Aldana versus Norma Dumont. That's decent. Edgar Chairez versus Kevin Borjas. A fine fight. Jasmine Yaragüe versus Caitlin Souza is okay. And Raul Rosas Jr. versus Ari Chilang. Another fight for Raul to just run through his opponent, which is always entertaining. I like seeing Raul win. That's the 10-fight Sphere card. Didn't they say this is going to be like the biggest card of the year? I think they meant like production wise, right? Because there's no way like the fights are the best of the entire. I mean, 300 is way better than this. 299 is way better than this. And that was the same card that O'Malley headlined against Cheeto. Like, look at the other O'Malley card earlier this year. You had O'Malley versus Cheeto, which is not as good as O'Malley versus Merab, but you still had O'Malley in the main event. Dustin versus Benoit Saint Denis in the co-main. Kevin Holland versus Michael Page. Gilbert Burns versus Jack Della Maddalena. And Peter Yan versus Song Yadong. That was the main card. Compare that to O'Malley versus Merab, Grasso versus Shevchenko 3, Ortega versus Lopez, Zellhuber versus Ribovitz, and Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Ode Osborne. Bro, the prelims of 299 was better than the main card of the Sphere. Do you know what the prelims looked like in 299 if you remember? You had Curtis Blades versus Jalton Almeida. Blades is fighting for the title against Tom Aspinall. You had Caitlin Chukagian versus Macy Barber. Okay. Mateusz Gamrot versus Rafael Dos Anjos, and Pedro Munoz versus Kyler Phillips. That was the prelims. You had Michelle Pereira and Rebellas Despain in the early prelims. Like, when they said this is the biggest card of the year, they had to have been production. They had to. Like, there's no way. I don't even know if this is a better card than 302. Just being completely honest with the fights on there. It's not bad, right? I would say it's like a pretty average pay-per-view card, which is not a bad thing, you know? But to hype it up as the biggest card of the year is kind of crazy. And where is Yair Rodriguez and Brandon Moreno? If it's for like the Mexicans, right? Yair and Moreno are the biggest stars from Mexico in MMA. I'm pretty sure they reached out to those two fighters, but they probably couldn't take whatever fight it was. Maybe they're injured or something. I understand they want it to be a Mexican theme, so they're going to have Mexican fighters. Whether they're unranked on the prelims, whether they're on the main card, but they should be ranked. At the very least, that should be a criteria for main card fighters to be ranked or popular. Like, Zellhuber is cool and all, he's a good fighter, but my man, nobody knows the guy. Keep him on the main cards for fight nights until he becomes ranked or popular one day. Then putting him on the main card for pay-per-views makes sense. The craziest one, though, is the Ode Osborne placement on the main card. Didn't this guy begin the entire fight night of Sandhagen versus Font? He was the first fight on a fight night card below all the prelims on the Sandhagen and Font card. On the Tuivasa versus Tibora fight night card, he was also just on the prelims of a Blob versus Blob fight night card. But for 306, he's gonna be opening up the main card, which is actually bigger than the next two fights. Usually, a lot of people, they watch the first fight, maybe they zone out or snooze a bit on the second and third before the co-main event and main event. The opener of the main card might actually be a bigger placement than some of the other fights on that card, and Ode Osborne is in that spot. Ode Osborne is 1-3 in his last 4 fights and just got submitted twice in a row. What would have made the card so much better? And honestly, I don't think a lot of people would. I mean, people are always going to complain about cards regardless if they're good or not. People went absolutely insane about 300, even though that card was stacked. But what would make the Sphere card so much better if they want this whole Mexican theme is to have Yair Rodriguez and Brandon Moreno on the main card. If they just did that and kept all the other fights on the prelims and early prelims, the card would have been really good. Like, really good. Like, maybe an 8 out of 10 matchmaking wise. That's the only change they needed to make. Just add Yair and Brandon Moreno to fight somebody, another ranked opponent, and that's the fix of the card. That would be perfect. Nothing else would need to be changed about the card. Nothing else. Just add those two guys. And they have 10 fights total. Usually pay-per-view cards are like 12 to 14 fights. They only have 10, so they could have made those additions. I'm pretty sure they reached out to Yair and Moreno. Logically, that would make sense that they would reach out to those two, and maybe they just couldn't fight. Maybe they're injured or whatever it is. If they had Sean O'Malley versus Merab as the main event, fine. I prefer Holloway versus Topuria, even though it doesn't make sense with a Spaniard. But O'Malley versus Merab is an excellent main event. Good title fight. Grasso versus Shevchenko, obviously it was going to be on the card regardless, whether it was going to be co-main or after that, if they had 3, right? 3 title fights would have been way better. But okay, we got Grasso versus Shevchenko. Makes sense. Ortega versus Lopez is a good fight. They could have Yair Rodriguez versus like another contender. Kelvin Kattar would have been the perfect matchup. In fact, Kelvin is fighting in September against Kyle Nelson for some reason. I don't know why he's fighting unranked Kyle Nelson. He is on a 3-loss streak, but it makes a lot more sense than Kelvin to go up against an unranked opponent. Or you can have Yair versus Sterling or Mavsar, any kind of ranked fighter that's available. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of them. Have that fight on the main card. And then have like Brennan Moreno versus like Tatsuro Taira. Or if Emil Abazi is ready to come back. That main card would have been actually really good. Yeah, but it's absolutely not like one of these big stacked cards like UFC 300 or something. The early part of 2024 had stacked pay-per-views. 298, 299, and 300 were all very, very good cards. And ever since 300, we haven't had a stacked card. The best was probably the Saudi Arabia fight night, but every other card is kind of just a bit underwhelming if we're going to be completely honest. 301 was honestly lower quality than fight night cards. 302 was okay. 303 had good prelims, but the main card felt almost like a fight night because of all like the changes. So many canceled fights on that card. So I don't blame it for being worse than the original matchmaking, but the final quality of that card wasn't what we're used to getting from pay-per-view cards. And even 304, it's kind of like, it's okay. You know, 305 is following like a similar kind of quality to 304, and same with 306. In fact, I think 304 might be a better card than 306 because Leon and Bilal are the main event. Aspinall versus Blades is the co-main event. 2 title fights. I think O'Malley versus Merab is better than Leon versus Bilal, but Grazo versus Shevchenko is not even close to Aspinall versus Blades. And we have Ortega versus Lopez, but on 304, there's Allen versus Shikadze, which is comparable. Yeah, man, fight cards are just, they haven't been the same since 300. They really haven't. Just a Saudi Arabia card was really good. It reminds me of like back in like 2012, around that period, or like it was like 2012 to 2014, where it felt like there was a bit of a downslope for the fight cards, you know? The first third of 2024 had amazing pay-per-view cards, but ever since April, the cards have been either average to like not that good. I don't know if 305 has been fully announced. I know we have a bunch of fights on there, like Dricus versus Adesanya, which is a great fight. Kai Kara-France versus Steve Urseg, great fight. The Blobs of Tuivasa versus Rosenstrike. Li Jing Liang versus Carlos Pratis. It's a fine fight, I guess. Junior Tafa versus Walter Walker. More of the Blobs. Casey O'Neill versus, I think, Luana Santos is the new change. Joshua Kulibao versus Ricardo Ramos. That's a good fight. Tom Nolan versus Alex Reyes. Okay. Stuart Nicole versus Jesus Santos Aguilar. Song Kinan versus Ricky Glenn. We have Matush Gamma versus Dan Hooker. Good fight. Really good fight. Herbert Burns versus Jack Jenkins. It's all right. So the good fights on that card, on paper at least, you know, you never know how the fights actually play out. For all we know, Junior Tafa versus Walter Walker could be like fight of the year. I don't think it would be fight of the year, but you never know how these fights play out. But Dricus versus Adesanya, Kai Kara-France versus Steve Urseg, and Gamrot versus Hooker are easily by far the best fights on the card. And none of the other fights come close to it. Kulibao versus Ramos is decent. You know, it's pretty good. And Jing Liang versus Prates isn't bad either. But those 3 top fights are just way better than the rest of the card. And again, like I said before, it seems like a similar quality to 306 and 304. Anywhere from like the 5 to 7 range out of 10. Whereas 298, 299, and 300 were near 10 out of 10s. 297, I guess I'm kind of just lumping it in there with the early cards, but I guess 297 wasn't as stacked as the rest of those, right? 298 was way better than 297. So this is how I rank the pay-per-view cards of the year so far. 300 is the best, of course. Then 299, which was O'Malley versus Merab. Then 298, which was Volkanovski versus Topuria. Then either 303 or 302. 303 was Pereira versus Yuri 2, and 302 was Islam versus Dustin. Those 2 cards were kind of comparable. After, then is 304. It looks like 306, then 305, then 297, and easily in last place is 301. 301 is one of the worst pay-per-view cards of all time. Not with the way it played out, but like how stacked it was. But speaking of 305 with Izzy versus Dricus, do you guys see how big Izzy is looking? He's saying he's walking on way heavier, which is going to make him stronger in the fight, probably better takedown defense. I wonder how his cardio is going to hold up though, as he does have to cut a lot of that weight. But a big version of Izzy would probably knock Dricus out if he connects on him cleanly. Dricus is way too open to counter punches, and he's going to have to like get into the distance where he can land shots on Izzy or try to take him to the ground. In the meantime though, Izzy can intercept him with a lot of different kind of strikes, from knees to elbows to left hooks. Similar kind of hooks that he threw against like Whitaker and Paulo Costa, because Dricus also wings over haymakers and overhands and crazy stuff like that, making him very vulnerable to those kind of counter hooks. But if Dricus takes Izzy to the ground, Izzy is probably going to get submitted. If Izzy stands up, like easily stands up, Dricus is going to get destroyed. If his grappling fails him, he's going to lose that fight, most likely. Oh, and I was watching the interview with Michael Bisping, Volkanovski, and MVP that they had with the fans. The fans were so drunk. They were just saying whatever. One guy was like disrespecting Volkanovski, which is part of the game at least. You know, like fans make fun of Bilal and all these other fighters. They're also going to make fun of Volkanovski, or at least some of them will. Even though Volk is a very likable figure, that's just kind of how it is in combat sports. And Volk doesn't seem to mind. It seemed like a lot more people were offended or insulted that Volk was getting trash talked about than Volk was. Like, Volk seemed like he didn't care at all. He was playing into it. He was having fun with it. Because the guy told him, how does it feel getting knocked out or head kicked by Islam? And Volk's like, which head kick? I don't even remember. But I did see a lot of the fans be very upset with the fan, with that one fan asking him that question. It's like, all right, it's part of the game, you know? If Volk doesn't care, neither should anybody else. But in that whole media scrum, did you guys hear Michael Bisping say that Tom Aspinall is the heavyweight version of GSP? Yo, I like Tom Aspinall a lot. He's like my favorite heavyweight to watch. And he might be the best heavyweight on the planet. But I ain't glazing Aspinall the way Bisping does. Like, Bisping's just saying a lot of crazy stuff about Tom Aspinall. I understand he's from the same country and stuff, and Bisping is very biased for other English fighters. But to call him heavyweight GSP is kind of crazy. Especially the fact that you fought that guy. Aspinall is nowhere near the level of GSP. Not even close. He's not as good of a striker as GSP was. He's not as good of a wrestler. Probably even his jiu-jitsu doesn't match up with GSP's. And they don't even really fight the same. Just because Aspinall has a strong double leg and he moves around pretty well, like, that doesn't make you equivalent to GSP at all. Or even having a similar kind of style. GSP fought so differently than Tom Aspinall. I don't even see the comparison, honestly, besides that strong double leg. Maybe he's saying it because Aspinall is well-rounded and GSP is known to be one of the most well-rounded fighters ever. Maybe that's the comparison, maybe? I don't know. The comparison was kind of weird, though, especially when you fully understand what GSP's skill set was about. And a big topic was this whole Jake Paul thing. There's a lot of MMA fans that are thinking about which MMA fighter can beat Jake Paul in a boxing match from middleweight and downward, right? So anyone from middleweight all the way to flyweight, who can beat Jake Paul in boxing? Well, the first thing is Jake is not even a middleweight anymore. When he fought Mike Perry in there, he was a light heavyweight. The guy was massive. And he was not kidding when he said he walks around 230 pounds. He looked like it. And that's why he called out Alex Pereira, which, again, like I said before, it's a respectable call out. He probably knows that it won't happen, right? He's not going to fight Alex Pereira. But trying to think of any fighter that could beat Jake Paul in a boxing match that's under light heavyweight, I don't think many of them can. Could Adesanya, right? Maybe Strickland Adesanya could put up a fight, but Adesanya's boxing just by itself isn't really that great. When he mixes it up with kicks and stuff, that's when he's really good with his hands. But if the opponent only has to focus on his boxing, he's not going to be as successful with it. Strickland has a better boxing style to beat Jake Paul than Adesanya does, but I don't know if he beats Jake Paul though. Like, the power difference between Strickland and Jake is very big. Like, Jake hits way harder than Strickland does. He's also bigger than Strickland too. Dricus gets knocked out. Whitaker gets slept. He's way too chinny. Whitaker's hands are really good. He has an amazing jab, but in an MMA context, he blitzes in from way too far with that karate stance, and he's so used to long range like that. His boxing skills are not going to translate that well into the sport of boxing. He gets absolutely destroyed by Jake Paul. Imavov would be kind of interesting because he is very fast. He has decent hands and stuff, but he will get probably knocked out as well. Chris Curtis would be an interesting fight with Jake, but I think Jake would beat him. What about any welterweights? Jack Della Maddalena could. He's just so much smaller though. And he's a bit of a plotter too, so he might have a problem with the jab from Jake, be kept on the outside range, and then anytime Jake hits him, even if Jack is keeping his hands up and blocking, it's gonna knock him all around the place. You know, those punches are very, very heavy. And you saw it like the way he was hitting Mike Perry's guard. Mike Perry was getting blown back, even though he was blocking some of the punches. And I think something similar would happen with Jack Della Maddalena, who's around the same size as Mike Perry. I know some people are bringing up Michael Page fighting Jake Paul, but no, Michael Page, kind of similar to Robert Whitaker, his striking excels in a MMA or kickboxing fight. And once you get down to the lightweight division and lower, they're just way too small. Even though Dustin Poirier may be a better boxer, he's not doing really anything to Jake. Or like Topuria, right? Topuria is definitely a better boxer than Jake Paul. But one punch and that guy's done. And he's not going to knock out Jake Paul most likely. Jake actually has a pretty decent chin. He ate some big shots from Mike Perry. He took a huge shot from Tyron Woodley. If you remember that from the first fight, almost knocked him down with it. Those are the kind of punches that Tyron Woodley has knocked opponents out with before. And Jake took the shots, so it's like, yo, you got to give him a lot of praise about that chin and his power. So I would say under 205 pounds, the fighter that has the best shot at beating Jake might be Sean Strickland. But I don't think Sean Strickland beats him in boxing. Skillfully, I would say it's like Topuria, right? Obviously, but he's just so small. Someone who's bigger might be Jack Della, but he's also a bit too small. Once you get to 205 pounds, Alex Pereira, I think, would beat him. I think Jan Blachowicz would be kind of interesting. I think Carlos Olberg would be interesting. But he probably beats all the 205ers besides Alex Pereira in a boxing match. And once you go to the heavyweight division, Tom Aspinall beats him in boxing. Volkov might beat him in boxing. Sergey Pavlovich, I think, beats him. Cyril Gane would be very interesting. Stipe in his prime would probably beat Jake Paul. Once they get to that size, it becomes a very difficult fight for Jake Paul. But he's not going to fight the heavyweights, right? He's going to fight the 205ers or under. And when I say 205ers, most likely just Alex Pereira. And it's about time we have to give that kind of respect to Jake. He's just a better boxer than most MMA fighters are. He just is. Oh, and this I wanted to talk about. I don't know if you guys seen the interview with Curtis Blades when he was talking about how the heavyweight division is unnecessarily criticized for being not as skilled. Now, he said the heavyweights are more skilled than the other weight classes, which I don't agree with at all, but he gave his argument as to why. He said in the heavyweight division, one punch could end the entire fight, right? So therefore, they have to do everything in their skill to not get punched even once. When you look in the lighter weight classes, like Max Holloway's fights, for an example, there's a lot of punches getting landed, and none of those fights that Max was in would ever last that long in the heavyweight division, whether it's Max getting hit or his opponent getting hit like that. So there is some truth to what Curtis Blades is saying, that the heavyweight division is just a different thing. You could look at it as like a different sport. But I don't agree with Curtis Blades when he says that they're more skilled. That I don't agree with, because when you look at the technique of these fighters, they're just not that great. Especially when you look at the lower end of the top 15. These guys can't even throw kicks. These guys don't move. No footwork at all. Their boxing is just horrendous. All they got is power and they can lay on top of you. Or just like one of my good MMA friends would say, when Tom Aspinall fought Sergey Pavlovich, heavyweight is just so bad compared to the lower weight classes that Aspinall beat Pavlovich because he was able to L-step, which was a major factor in Tom Aspinall winning that fight, lining up his punches off of that too, dodging Pavlovich's attacks, and eventually knocking the guy out. There's no top 5 fight in the lower weight classes where one of the fighters is winning because they can L-step and their opponent can't. If I were to compare the heavyweights to like the featherweight division or the lightweight division, the top 5 of heavyweight is somewhere like equivalent to the top 15 maybe of those lighter weight classes. The top 10 or top 15 of heavyweight though is like regional level for the lower weight classes, not even a major organization. The skill level is just so different. The only thing that kind of equalizes it is the fact that those heavier guys just hit so hard. If Max Holloway, for an example, was a heavyweight, he would be getting knocked out by certain guys that he shouldn't lose to, just because the knockout threat is just so big, right? Everybody has such a big puncher's chance of winning. Derek Lewis fought for a belt. Tai Tuivasa was a top 3 fighter at one point, just because they can hit hard. I mean, the fact that Derek Lewis beat Alexander Volkov is absolutely insane. He was losing the whole fight and then lands one big punch as Volkov made one mistake of raising his knee to defend himself from distance against Derek Lewis. And that's not to say that the heavyweight division can't get good. They can absolutely get much better. There's one problem though. Most of the heavyweights that would be good are competing in other sports like basketball and American football. Those guys are just way more athletic. Like, they're way more explosive. They grasp onto athletic concepts way easier than fighters in the heavyweight division right now. If some of these athletes in American football and basketball would have instead trained their bodies and mind in combat, the heavyweight division would look very, very different throughout the top 15. Like, some people bring up, what if LeBron James trained boxing and wrestling as a kid, came into MMA and just honed his skills from a young age? I mean, this guy would be unstoppable. If he's a fighter at heart, right? He's got to have a good chin. He's going to get hit, so he has to get used to that kind of dynamic in a fight. Not always being the hammer, but sometimes he's going to be the nail, and he has to be able to compete around that. But that's the biggest thing that goes against the heavier divisions in MMA as to why they're not as skilled as the lighter weight classes. That's not to say we didn't have any athletic guys in the heavyweight division. I mean, Brock Lesnar, for an example, was extremely athletic. Cyril Gane is extremely athletic. Francis Ngannou was athletic. John Jones is athletic. And look where all of these guys reached. They're all at the top of the weight class. Like, Ciryl Gane makes a lot of technical mistakes in fights, especially with his footwork and his head movement and stuff. But he's able to win fights and not get caught as much because he's just so much more athletic and faster than his opponents. How are guys like Marcin Tybura and Sergey Spivak going to catch up to that guy? There's too many blobs in the heavyweight division that just aren't going to beat guys like Ciryl Gane, Tom Aspinall, Alexander Volkov, and John Jones, right? Or even Sergey Pavlovich. A prime Brock Lesnar who fought like 10 or 12 years ago would dust the majority of the heavyweight division right now. Can you imagine if Brock Lesnar fought guys like Shamil Gaziev, Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa? Like, he would steamroll all of these guys. And he wasn't even that like experienced in MMA competitively. He was experienced in wrestling, a very good collegiate wrestler, but at the same time being one of the most athletic fighters we've ever seen. The guy won the heavyweight title in like his third or fourth professional fight. Do you know how insane that is? He beat Randy Couture, who was a lot older to be fair, but he also beat like Frank Mir and Shane Carwin before eventually losing to skilled heavyweights who are actually somewhat technical while also being athletic as well. Cain Velasquez and Alistair Overeem, both athletic fighters and both more skilled than Brock Lesnar was. And that is why they were both able to beat him. But you know how wild it was back then in the heavyweight division when you had guys like Brock and Overeem and Shane Carwin. Those guys looked like Marvel superheroes in there, all on horse meat and juice. Colossals just colliding with each other. Now, I don't know if Shane Carwin ever took anything, but that guy was absolutely massive. Like, it didn't make sense how big that guy was. There's a picture of him and Brock Lesnar touching fists, and I'm not kidding, Shane Carwin's fist was like double of Brock Lesnar's. That guy was a physical specimen. And the weird thing about him is when you watched his fights, he didn't look like he was as tall or as long as he was. Shane Carwin looks like a very compact, short guy who's just insanely bulky. But he was 6'2" with an 80-inch reach, like around 260 pounds of muscle. And still to this day, he's one of the hardest hitters we've ever seen in the sport. I would say Francis Ngannou is the biggest puncher, then it's Derek Lewis, and then it's probably Shane Carwin. But Shane Carwin was a better fighter than Derek Lewis was. He had somewhat of a wrestling game. He was a better puncher, I think, than Derek Lewis. He was also more athletic, but strangely enough, he had worse cardio. But with that kind of power, I mean, you don't even need that much cardio to win fights. In fact, all of his wins were in the first round. Literally, every single one of his wins in MMA were in the first round. He wasn't able to knock out Brock Lesnar, mainly because there was juice involved, potentially, allegedly, and he couldn't knock out Junior Dos Santos because he barely landed any punches on the guy. Like, he landed one good shot. There was this one hook he hit JDS with and rocked him. It was insane. JDS also had an insane chin in his prime. He was a very hard guy to knock out, evident with what Cain Velasquez had to do to him in order to finish him by TKO. But one shot from Shane Carwin nearly had him on skates, and that was after Carwin took a beating from JDS. And still to this day, one of the worst late stoppages in the sport's history was Shane Carwin beating Frank Mir. For anyone that hasn't seen that fight, go watch that fight. It's a first round knockout. I mean, it's Shane Carwin versus Frank Mir we're talking about here. And every time you watch the fight, it looks like Shane almost unalives Frank Mir. I mean, Frank Mir had no chin as it was. To get beat down by Shane Carwin, pummeled over and over again while Frank Mir is unconscious, was some nasty work, man. Now, some people say, what about Alex Pereira? Is he the hardest puncher we've ever seen? I will never say a light heavyweight is the hardest puncher until I see them in the heavyweight division, and I've had that opinion ever since Fabio Maldonado got knocked out by Stipe Miocic in the first round. For people that don't know, Fabio Maldonado was known for his chin. That was the biggest thing about him. This guy, you just can't knock him out. Rampage Jackson couldn't knock him out. Glover Teixeira put a beat down on him and couldn't knock him out. Then he went up to the heavyweight division and got one-shotted by Stipe. Ever since then, I will never say a light heavyweight hits harder than heavyweights until they go up there and prove it. Because the heavyweight division is just a different game. Just like Curtis Blades said, those guys just hit way too hard. The only exception would be like Daniel Cormier, but Daniel Cormier started as a heavyweight and arguably was in his prime in the heavyweight division too, because he didn't need to cut all that weight. And the only reason why he went down to 205 is because his friend Cain Velasquez was the heavyweight champ and he never wanted to fight him. So he actually compromised himself to go down to a weight class he never fought in before. Even after having so much success at heavyweight, defeating Josh Barnett, Bigfoot Silva, winning the Strikeforce Grand Prix tournament, but he still went down to 205 and tested himself there. I've always thought that Daniel Cormier was a better heavyweight than he was a 205er. Or another example, we could look at Rumble, right? Anthony Johnson is known to be one of the biggest punchers in MMA history, but he was only able to show that up to light heavyweight. He had one fight in the heavyweight division against Andrei Arlovski, glass chin, out of his prime Andrei Arlovski, and he couldn't even knock him out, even though he hit him with some of the biggest shots he can throw, and he couldn't knock out glass chin Arlovski that everyone else at heavyweight's knocking out. During that time especially, he broke Arlovski's jaw, but he couldn't knock him out at all. This is why I'm not going to say that Alex Pereira hits harder than the heavyweights do, until he fights at heavyweight and shows that he hits harder than them. And I've come to notice a lot of people have a misconception about a fighter's prime, right? They think it's just age, like 35 years old. Everybody's 35 years are the same, when that's not actually true. Some fighters, they reach their prime way earlier in their career, and they exit their prime way earlier as well. There's some fighters that reach their prime late in their careers and exit their primes late as well. Like for an example, Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo is a perfect example. Aldo's prime ended in his early 30s. But then you look at Corey Sandhagen. Corey has reached his prime around that same time, right? His early 30s is when he reached his prime, where Aldo exited his prime around that same age. And the only way we can actually determine when a fighter's in their prime and when they're not is just off of their performances, not their age. Alexandre Volkanovski's in his prime all the way up to like 35 years old, right? Like 34, 35. Jose Aldo was in his prime all the way up until he was like 30 years old. And there's a clear difference in their abilities around that age, right? Ever since the second Max Holloway fight, or actually after the first Max Holloway fight, Aldo has never been the same. It's clearly from his skill that he has declined. He did a nosedive, but there is a slight decline on Jose Aldo's skills ever since the first Max fight. Whereas for Alexander Volkanovski, he never slowed down. And the only time we're speculating he's out of his prime is because he's taken so much damage to the head in his last two fights. That's the only reason. We actually haven't seen him decline yet in his skills, right? So some fighters get out of their prime because whether they take too much damage to the head, whether it's too much CTE, their maturity is just a bit different. They grasp a hold of skills and techniques at a younger age and then they just stop learning. And the game just passes them up if they're like in their early 30s, for an example. You know, there's been fighters that's happened to them. Changing weight classes too often and accumulating losses over it, like RDA. Focusing too much on the size of the opponent instead of actually progressing the skills in your own natural weight class. Now, for RDA, his natural weight class would be like 165 pounds or 160 pounds, but he was caught in between of like 170, 155, so he had to pick one of the weight classes. 55, he's too big, hard for him to make that weight cut. For 70, he's too small. So a lot of his focus had to be on making weight or handling a bigger opponent, which is a natural like thing that most fighters don't have to go up against, right? They don't have to pick one or the other. Most fighters, they fit into a weight class, whereas guys like RDA don't. And because of that, the game can pass them up, right? So there's many different reasons as to why some fighters hit their prime early or they exit early compared to others. And a big one that I always see is the whole thing about Dominic Cruz, right? Dominic Cruz and even like Fedor Emelianenko. Way back in the day, there were so many people that used to say that Fedor lost in his prime when he went to Strikeforce. Fedor was not in his prime when he was in Strikeforce. He wasn't even in his prime when he fought Arlovski and Silva. In fact, his own coach back then even said that Fedor is not the same as he used to be before Strikeforce. There was one proof of that with him competing in Sambo, winning a bronze medal when he was a consistent gold medalist for many years before that. First person to notice a decline in a fighter is the coach, before anybody else. And if Fedor's coach was talking about that way back then, before Strikeforce, we know Fedor was not in his prime anymore. So when he lost to Bigfoot and he lost to Dan Henderson and Verdum, it wasn't the same Fedor Emelianenko that we saw fight Crow Cop and Big Nog. Same thing goes with Dominic Cruz. A lot of people think that Dominic Cruz is in his prime when he fought TJ Dillashaw. And I guess it's because of his age. He wasn't old, but Cruz had to fight through so many injuries. He had multiple layoffs because of injuries. He never came back quite the same fighter. You know, it's very evident when you look at Dominic Cruz fighting TJ, right? You look at his skills in that fight, and then you look at him fighting Uriah Faber the second time. There's a clear difference on how good Dominic Cruz was. Just how he's operating mechanically. His technique was better back then. He was faster, he seemed stronger, reflexes were better back then, and he was way younger. Like he was in his, I think like mid to late 20s when he fought Faber. That was prime Cruz, right? Him fighting Faber, him fighting Demetrious Johnson. That was the best Dominic Cruz we've ever seen. The last time we've seen Dominic Cruz was arguably in the Demetrious Johnson fight, maybe against Mizugaki, maybe. But Mizugaki just wasn't that great, right? He didn't belong to be in there with Dominic Cruz. It was a tune-up fight for Cruz, and he destroyed him, you know, as he should have. And the crazy thing is we got guys like Romero and Randy Couture and Michael Bisping and Glover Teixeira. Like these guys reached their prime later in life, like mid to late 30s, But then you have a guy like Gustafsson, right? Who is a heavier fighter. Usually the light heavyweights, they reach their prime when they're older, but it wasn't the same for Gustafsson, right? Gustafsson was in his prime in his early 30s. And honestly, his prime ended very quickly. The last time we saw prime Gustafsson was when he fought Glover Teixeira back in 2017. When he fought John Jones, it was very obvious he wasn't the same fighter. He was so much slower, way worse footwork. I know he got injured in the fight, but even before the injury, he wasn't moving the same. Gustafsson's prime ended when he was 30 years old. People probably don't even know. He's 37 right now. At his age, guys like Alex Pereira are just dominating the sport, where Gustafsson is just like a shell of his former self. And the same goes with like Shogun Rua. The last time the Shogun was in his prime was in the early 2010s. We're talking about like 12 years ago was the last time we seen a prime Shogun. He was 30 years old back then, and that was it. Shogun's prime ended very early in his career. So when people say, oh, this guy, he is in his prime still because he's in his early 30s, that's not how you look at it. You got to look at their skills and how they're fighting and see if there is an actual decline, evidently, not just because of their age. Everybody ages differently, like vastly different. But with that, let's go right to the questions. We're going to start with Troy Hartung. Considering John Silva has already missed weight in one of his featherweight bouts and did tremendous against Drew Dober, should he stay at 155 and forget about featherweight? And how do you see John Silva doing against each current top 15 contender at 155? I especially would want to see Silva fight Rafael Fiziev in the near future. That's got fight of the year written all over it. Yeah, that would be an insane fight. I don't think John Silva should stay at 155. He seems a little too small. I mean, there was a definite size advantage for Drew Dober in that fight, and it was a John Silva who didn't really cut any weight. He took it on short notice, and even if he added more muscle, I don't know if he's big enough for guys like Islam, Oliveira, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, etc., right? He's always going to be smaller than these guys because he's not tall either. He's not stocky, he's not wide, he's not big, muscular, and he's not tall. He's roughly around the same size as like Ilia Topuria. But strangely enough, when Topuria went up to 155 and fought Jai Herbert, he almost got knocked out. Eventually got the knockout himself, but he got caught by a big head kick. John Silva went up to 155 on short notice against a better opponent in Drew Dober and performed way better, like skillfully beat down Drew Dober from beginning to end. So I think at 145, he's going to be one of the future contenders, like him, maybe Diego Lopez, Ilia Topuria. That's probably your future of the featherweight division. Those three guys at the top. And maybe Movsar Evloev as well. But how does he do against the top 15 at 155? I think he beats Bobby Green. I think he beats RDA. 50-50 with Jalen Turner. I think his fight IQ would actually win that fight now. Jalen Turner, he has the skills to beat John Silva, but he does make a lot of mistakes, evidently shown in his fight with Renato Moicano. So Benoit Saint Denis might take him down and submit him, but on the feet he destroys BSD. So I might go with BSD because of the size, but that's a close fight. Close fight with Dan Hooker, but I think he beats Hooker. Close fight with Moicano, but I think he beats him. Loses to Holloway. Fiziev is an interesting style because Fiziev doesn't have cardio. He will win the first 2 rounds, and if he doesn't knock out John Silva, he's probably going to lose on a decision, especially if he goes 5 rounds. So in a 3-round fight, I got Fiziev. In a 5-round fight, I got John Silva. And they are very close in size as well, so that would be a magnificent fight, man. Really good. I think he beats Beneil Dariush, to be honest. I think he beats Michael Chandler. Fight IQ is just so different for them two. He loses the Gamrot, loses the Poirier. Depending at the state of Justin Gaethje, he could win if Gaethje's not in his prime anymore, but if Gaethje's still in good form, he should beat John Silva. I got Charles Oliveira against John Silva, Arman wins, and Islam wins as well. Then with the Nano Peach, Jake Paul versus Alex Pereira breakdown. Pereira left hooks, KOs Jake Paul. He's too good of a boxer. He's too big, too long, too tall, too skilled, too technical. Jake Paul literally has nothing better than Alex Pereira in a boxing fight. So I would actually go with Alex Pereira in this one. Would you consider John undefeated if his loss is overturned? No, because I think he lost to Dominic Reyes, and he may have lost to even Alexander Gustafsson the first time. There's an argument he lost against Thiago Santos, but for sure the Reyes fight should be a win for Dominic Reyes. So officially, yeah, I guess he would be undefeated if they overturn that DQ loss, but when you actually watch the fights, John Jones should have at least 1 loss on his record, and that is against Dominic Reyes. Then you say, I feel we took Volk, Usman, etc. for granted. Ilia hasn't fought in a hot minute. Why do you think that is, and why these former champs fought so often in comparison to the current champs? Different mentality, right? Ilia was originally, when he got the belt, he was like turning down everybody and saying he wants to fight Conor McGregor and stuff. All of these champions can be active. I mean, look at Alex Pereira. He's as active as a champion can be, and he's in the same era as guys like Topuria, Leon, Dricus, etc. But he's fighting more often than any of those other champions. And it's kind of a flashback to guys like Volk, Usman, and even if a lot of people don't like him, even Adesanya, Adesanya, very active champions, man. So it's a difference in mentality. Then what would you do with Hamza? I would do Hamza Chimaev versus Paulo Costa next, or against Jared Cannonier. He's still very wild in the head for saying that he deserves a title shot. That is crazy to say. And then how would you score MMA? I would do open rounds, or open scoring, should I say. I would do full fight scoring instead of round by round. I would still keep the damage impact aspect of scoring. So like if a fighter is hitting someone a lot harder, that's going to score for more. And I think that should be the number one in the criteria, because the closer you get to finishing a fight, if you're causing damage or if you're getting someone in a close submission or something like that, I think that should be above things like octagon control and aggression and stuff, you know? I don't know what to think about scoring defense, because it's rewarding fighters to not be offensive, which hurts like the spectating part of the sport, but defense is an actual skill. Now, I understand the argument that defense is a reward in itself, but I do like the idea or the credible nature of scoring defense for fighters. So those are some ways I would score a fight. Then we go to Richard Connolly. Hey Weasel, nice to talk again. Really been busy these last few months, but excited to start watching you again. Of this list of fighters paired with each other, who do you believe is the better natural athlete and who has the better fight IQ? Islam or Alex Pereira? Islam in both of those. So he's the better athlete, I think, and he has higher fight IQ. Habib and John Jones. I would say John is better in both of those, maybe. Well, fight IQ is, I think, pretty comparable, right? It's very even. But in terms of natural athlete, I think that would go to John Jones. GSP and Usman, both of those go to GSP. O'Malley and Marab, both of those go to O'Malley. Cyril Gane and Jalton Almeida, both of those go to Gane, of course. Hamza and Shavkat. I think Hamza is a better athlete, but Shavkat has higher fight IQ. And I think that was quite evident with how Hamza fought Gilbert Burns. He should not have fought Burns in a brawling manner, whereas Shavkat doesn't make those kind of mistakes, fighting his opponent in his kind of style, or something that would actually give him a chance to win the fight, right? Brawling with Gilbert Burns the way he did when he has so much success fighting off the jab and being technical with his boxing, gave Gilbert Burns a chance to win and almost knocked Hamza out. Whereas with Shavkat, when he fought like Wonder Boy, for an example, he took him down and submitted him. He tried to wrestle with Jeff Neal. That's the big fight that people point to against Shavkat, but he was trying to wrestle. Jeff Neal came in heavy. He was bigger than Shavkat, or at least it looked like. Shavkat couldn't take him down and had to do what he could to get the submission, and that came down to outstriking Jeff Neal. So fight IQ, I think, goes to Shavkat Rakhmonov. Then we go to Buns Bunny Buns. Why isn't the real GOAT on your list? The undefeated and undisputed greatest of all time. Don't you know when you're the greatest fighter in the world, they got a name for you? They don't call you a great fighter. They call you Chill Sonnen. Beat him if you can. From the mean streets of Westland, Oregon. Do you know what it's like when your parents buy you a Ferrari instead of a Lamborghini? It makes a real thug out of you. Chill is the undisputed GOAT that only belongs in the conversation with guys like Artem Lobov and Hasbullah. But people forget about Andy Wang. Andy Wang is also one of the GOATs, but he retired in his prime, so he is easily forgotten. Then we go to EMC Productions. Love the content, keep it up. I have a couple things here. First, because the UFC roster is so extensive, I believe that a fan-based ranking on the UFC website would help a lot with matchups. This could be as simple as first to last overall, or as detailed as ability categories. Either way, it would allow fans to give their take on all of the fighters that are assigned to the UFC, making every fight mean something to the average fan. Second, I am a big baseball fan, and the debate about replacing human umpires with a computerized system is a giant debate. The tech might not be there yet, but what do you think about computerized judging of fights? It would be along the lines of what you do, but immediate. I think that would be pretty cool. You know, if like AI took over scoring fights, there would definitely be a lot less mistakes than the actual fight judges we have now in the sport, but I don't know if they're going to be able to do that. That would be really interesting though. Then we go to Mike Griffith. I love the channel, been a fan since forever. Never miss an episode from this channel. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much, man. Now that we're done with the fanboy stuff, let's get to the intelligent commentary, because that's what I'm known for always making the most intelligent, super smart statements, and these statements I'm about to give you are the most brilliant, phenomenal, and most logical statements on the planet. Number one, Johnny Walker would absolutely destroy Alex Pereira and John Jones on the same night. Okay, what's the next statement? Yes, he KOs Pereira inside 2 minutes of the first round, and because he took no damage on that night, he fights John Jones on the same night and absolutely retires him. Statement 2, you misspelled state. Ben Askren has way better boxing than Conor McGregor. The reason that fight hasn't been put together is because Conor knows Ben Askren is super dangerous for him on the feet. Yeah, no wrestling. Ben Askren beats both Conor and Adesanya the same night too. Habib will lose a wrestling match to Kevin Holland, and he retired because he never fought Kevin Holland. Yeah, Kevin Holland would start punching him from bottom and knock him out. Conor has way better cardio than Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson, and Colby put together. You could put their cardio together and it wouldn't be even close to Conor's cardio. I'm sure you read those statements wondering how I could be so smart. Well, I was born like this. I guess you could say I'm one of the chosen fews. Feel free to admire my greatness, Weasel. Follow my lead. Don't ever drink, don't do drugs, and stay smart. Nice day. Thanks, man. I think you should be taking that advice. Bro just came from like the school of self-awareness and just started going off. Bro spent way too much time with Diego Sanchez. Then we go to the public questions, and we start with Antonio. Oh, man. How big is it? It's one of those kind of podcasts, huh? Well, you can see it for $4.99. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to run those girls out of business at OF. And you go. Guys, the one time I don't ask a serious question, it gets all the likes. Shake my head. That's how it is sometimes, man. They like this question more than your other ones. Yeah, but my hands are really big. So there's your answer. They're like, think of like half of Tony Ferguson's hands, but doubled of Brock Lesnar's. Then we go to Labazi. Critical analysis of magic being used. Well, straight spells are better than looping spells, and if you enchant them a right way, with good footwork for the ritual dance, they will be more effective, and the scoring of these certain spells should be given more points. Now, necromancy should be at least a point deduction, but any kind of call of the afterlife should either be a DQ or given a yellow card. Somehow we're in Pride now. If one of the corners, though, is found with any kind of wand or staff, that's considered a PEM, so no performance-enhancing magic. It all has to be from your own skill. And then we go to Young Buddha. How can Muay Thai fighters take more damage and fight a long career while having relatively low CTE? Some of these one championship fights are crazy. They hit their head with poles to the point where they catalyze their bones, so it becomes a lot stronger. No, I'm just kidding. That's not a thing. I don't know, and I don't know if there's like studies of CTE in Muay Thai as much as there is in MMA or boxing. There might be a lot more CTE, we just don't know about it, right? Because a lot of these Muay Thai fights are happening in like the deep jungles of Thailand and stuff. I don't know how advanced medically they are over there, so maybe they believe what Vanderlei Silva believed. If you get hit more to the head, it strengthens your brain. Now, here's the thing about Muay Thai that's different than like boxing, for an example. They don't spar hard that often. In boxing, they go crazy in the sparring room and then they go into a fight, get knocked down 3 times, and now they're just all messed up, right? In Muay Thai, it's a bit different. Their sparring is usually a lot lighter, which allows them to fight more often. The CTE you see in combat sports, most of it comes from sparring, not the actual fights. So with less sparring for the Muay Thai fighters, they're probably not taking as much damage as like MMA fighters or boxers. And also in a lot of Muay Thai fights, they take like the first 2 or 3 rounds relatively slower for some reason. But you definitely see that in their fights. Like they start a lot slower and then they start picking it up later in the fight with a lot more leg kicks and body kicks and stuff like that than high kicks. Then we're going to decide, no man, when we're going to see the Weasel step in the octagon. I'll spare all those fighters. If I stepped in, there would be no more belts for anyone to win. And I don't want to show them my swift shovel hook. If I start throwing that shovel hook, they won't allow that punch to be thrown in MMA anymore. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm just messing around. Bro, if I start throwing a jab, they wouldn't allow that either. Like, it would just ruin the sport because all the techniques would start to get banned by the commissions if I start throwing them. I really don't want to fight anymore. I don't have that aspiration like I used to. It doesn't mean I wouldn't take up like one fight or another in whatever MMA organization it is. It just depends on the pay, of course, or the opponent, right? If it's some kind of like professional opponent that a lot of people know about, that would be pretty fun. But no, I'm not in the physical shape anymore or have been training consistently to fight in the cage. Then with the Tyrone Winter. Unpopular opinion. Shavkat is not a hard fight for Leon Edwards. Shavkat is very hittable on the feet, and while he does have good striking offense, I still think Leon is overall better in that area. And while Shavkat has good control and submissions once he gets on top of you, he has bad takedowns to begin with. He was having trouble taking down Wonderboy. It took him 8 minutes to take down Wonderboy, who is nowhere near the level of Leon when it comes to takedown defense. I think Leon would also be able to fight Shavkat in the clinch, with Leon having a very strong clinch game. So I don't think Shavkat is going to be able to stall Leon in the clinch either. And even if Leon gets taken down, he has very good get-ups, and I think he's even solid enough to give Shavkat a lot of resistance in defending submissions. And yes, I know Shavkat may be able to get a submission, but that's if he gets Leon down, which I don't see happening very often. I would probably just see Leon outstriking Shavkat throughout most of the fight, defending takedowns. Shavkat may land some decent shots here and there, but Leon is probably going to be very measured. I honestly could see Leon knocking him out. The only way I think Shavkat wins is if Leon just misses a punch or something something as Shavkat jumps on his back and chokes him out. Also, if this gets answered, Weasel Brother, we need an update on the Nightmare matchups. Always look forward to it every year. Thank you so much, man. And yeah, I will get up the Nightmare matchups very soon. And that is a quite unpopular opinion, especially if Shavkat's able to take him to the ground. I think he should be able to find some kind of submission because he is quite different than some of the other grapplers that Leon has fought before. The guy's very heavy. He's very big. He reminds me a lot of Luke Rockhold on the ground, who was an absolute monster when he got on top of you. And there's a big difference with like getting up from Kamaru Usman, who doesn't threaten submissions, or Colby Covington, who doesn't really threaten that many submissions either, or comparable to Shavkat, right? Shavkat's going to go for your neck. He's going to try to submit you with many different kind of positions, and you can't just stand up by fighting off his hands as easily as he could do against like Kamaru Usman, right? Usman's not going to jump on your back and try to grab your neck from standing up like that. Shavkat is a very different kind of grappler compared to Usman and Colby. But I do agree that Shavkat's wrestling to get Leon to the ground is not going to be as strong as some of the other guys that Leon has fought before. And he is quite hittable in the stand-up. But Leon does derp, right? He does kind of just have brain farts in the stand-up at times and gets clipped with shots that he should not be getting hit by, right? And Shavkat could connect with a big right hand or even a kick, rocking Leon and then submitting him after that, So I think Leon versus Shavkat is the fight between the two best welterweights at the moment, right? Jack Della Maddalena might be one of them as well, but it seems like Shavkat and Leon are the best welterweights. They were the T Kinder. How did the top 5 in all divisions fare in the next heavier weight division? It would be pretty long to go through every single weight class, top 5 versus top 5. So I will say there are a few examples of fighters that could do very well in the next weight class, but most of them would just get outsized. But thank you for the question. Then we go to Aiden McGowan. If Mighty Mouse came back to the UFC, do you think he could become the flyweight champion again? And how we do against the top 5? If he beats Pantoja and defends the title once or twice, is he the undisputed MMA GOAT? I could see him becoming the flyweight champion again because I think he could beat Pantoja. He's more well-rounded. He's better in the stand-up. He has better wrestling. He's a little bit outsized. I think Pantoja's a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. He has better jiu-jitsu. We've seen lesser grapplers put Mighty Mouse in worse positions or in pretty dangerous positions like Tim Elliott getting him in a guillotine, but it would be a competitive fight, even at Mighty Mouse's age. How we do against the top 5, I think he would beat Brennan Royval. He would beat Brennan Moreno. Especially the Moreno that fought Royval the last time. That version of Moreno loses to Mighty Mouse. Close fight, but beats Amir Albazi, who is very inactive. I think he was injured, but he hasn't fought in a very long time. He beats Kai Kara France, and he beats Tatsuro Taira. But all of these fights are actually very competitive with Mighty Mouse. And if he were to beat Pantoja and defend the belt like once or twice, yes, I think he would be the undisputed GOAT. Because right now, there's an argument between him and GSP in like the number 2 spot. I mean, he's even arguing number 1. Like, people can say that Mighty Mouse is the greatest MMA fighter of all time. Most people hold Jones there or GSP, but Mighty Mouse does have an argument with those other two. He's that close. And if he were to beat Pantoja and defend the belt once or twice, I think he would be the number 1 fighter because a Pantoja win is massive. Pantoja is just a legend of the flyweight division at this point. Who he has beaten is absolutely crazy. The competition this guy has went through from Moreno, Kai Kara France, Royval, Steve Erceg, and many more. For Mighty Mouse to come back and beat that guy in his prime would be insane. Just that alone, not even including the other title defenses against maybe Royval and Moreno. You would have to probably say Mighty Mouse is the greatest of all time if he were to do that. Another question about Mighty Mouse. By ordinary opinion, Mighty Mouse versus TJ in their prime. TJ's too big. And TJ in his prime is a very highly skilled fighter. It's not just some guy who's just bigger than Mighty Mouse. No, it's a guy who arguably is a better striker, skillfully, has crazy good takedown defense, and is bigger and stronger than Mighty Mouse while also having very good footwork. I don't see Mighty Mouse beating a prime TJ, right? Prime Mighty Mouse weighed like 140 pounds. Prime TJ weighed like in the 150s. He's also like, 3 inches taller and very athletic himself. Would be a great fight though. Then with Prince Malcolm. Imagine you get the call to step in as a last minute replacement on a fight card with Steve Mazzagatti as the ref, but the options are TRT Vitor in Brazil, John Picogram Jones, Shama Magic, Alex Pereira, and Uberim. Who would you accept to fight of the 4? The door of the Shadow Realm would open, but I would have the best chance probably against Uberim just because he was so incredibly cocky and he would just leave his chin out for me to hit sometimes, and he had a glass chin too, so maybe that's a possibility, maybe like a 1% chance, but definitely a better chance than TRT Vitor in Brazil, so it's not even just TRT at that point. If he's in Brazil, my man's getting pumped with like futuristic kind of PEDs. John Picogram Jones, I mean, the guy's incredibly intelligent. Imagine getting choked out like Lyoto did. Shama Magic Alex Pereira would start shooting like energy blasts at me out of nowhere. And Uberim is like a, again, Marvel superhero, but with a glass chin. So there's at least some chance there. Lower fight IQ than the other three, a worse chin than the other three, and more cocky than the other three. So I would go with Uberim. And he unfollowed me on Twitter once just because I predicted that he was going to get knocked out in a fight. So we have a little bit of a beef, you know? They would have forever MMA. If there was a Royal Rumble with every division's top 15 where heavyweights come out first and then flyweights last, who is most likely to win? Probably Ilia Topuria. Because think about it. If the heavyweights are coming out first, they're all going to gas out. And eventually the light heavyweights would beat them, or the middleweights would even beat them at that point. The middleweights start to gas out, where the welterweights beat them. Lightweights beat the welterweights just because they're also better than them. A competition between the featherweights and lightweights. But because the featherweights are going to be in better condition as they came out after, I think they beat everybody else. Like Topuria beats anyone in the bantamweight division and anyone in the flyweight division, while also having good enough cardio to keep up that pace, being one of the last fighters to come out there. So Ilia Topuria would win. So a lot of it would come down to cardio. Then with a Yoel Castro, which words are more ironic in hindsight? Adesanya saying, I beat that guy one time. He has one win against Alex. McGregor out on a stretcher as he went on to break his leg. Colby Covington lead up to the first Usman fight saying Usman has never finished anyone and going on to get his jaw broken and TKO'd. Cody Garbrandt telling TJ Dillashaw he has no chin and going on to get knocked out in 4 of his next 6 fights. Yeah, those are all pretty ironic. Adesanya's is probably the most ironic because he was for real about it. Like, he really meant that Alex Pereira would be that nobody in a bar talking about how he beat Adesanya once. Whereas, like, Cody Garbrandt, he's just not that intelligent. Colby was playing a character, you know. Obviously, he knew Kamaru Usman could knock people out. McGregor, the whole leg thing, it was kind of ironic, but not as much as Adesanya, right? Adesanya being for real about Alex Pereira, and he only has one win against that guy, and now he's more in the position that Alex Pereira was about being the guy that said that he beat that guy in a fight one time. That is kind of crazy. Then we go to Sleepy Squirtle. Who's more likely to have a rapid decline? Pantoja once his chin finally cracks, Yuri Prohaska, Colby Covington, or Brian Ortega. Well, Colby seems to be more likely to have a bigger decline than the other three, mainly because he's older than the rest. He's probably not in his prime anymore. He seems to be like 1 foot out the door. I think he's like a professional poker player now or something. You know, he's making a lot of money over there. So if he continues to fight for a long time, he would have probably the bigger decline of the other three. Whereas the other guy might be Yuri Prohaska, just because his technique is not as high level compared to Ortega or Pantoja. I wouldn't have Brian Ortega up there because he just won. He just beat Yair Rodriguez, who's a top contender. So I wouldn't put him there. Brian is never going to like decline that big, I think. Like, if he starts to lose against fighters who aren't in the top 5, I think he would retire at that point. Pantoja, on the other hand, if his chin does crack, then he still has jiu-jitsu to rely on. You know, he's still a better grappler than most of the fighters. I think actually every fighter at flyweight. So he might lose a couple fights here and there, but he wouldn't get completely decimated with consecutive fights, you know? So I would say Colby's number 1, Yuri's number 2, Pantoja's number 3, and Ortega's number 4. They would have shell-shocked. Number 1, would Max have beaten the Volk that fought Topuria? No, I don't think so. Number 2, out of John Jones, GSP, and Demetrious Johnson, rank them by their well-roundedness. Also, which is one aspect in their game of these 3 fighters that you think is overrated? I would say Demetrious is more well-rounded than the other 2, then GSP, then John Jones. And an overrated aspect of the 3 fighters. John Jones' footwork and boxing aren't that good. I don't know anything that's overrated about GSP. And as for Demetrious Johnson, how well he does in matchups against heavier opponents is quite overrated because a lot of fans today think he beats like the best fighters at 135 and stuff, when he's just way too small. But in terms of like technique and stuff, I don't know anywhere where he's overrated. Your third question, people call Nunes versus Pena 1 a fluke, GSP versus Matt Serra a fluke, but I don't see people saying Cyborg versus Nunes is a fluke or Conor versus Aldo. If they were to fight again, say in their peak, will things turn out the same way or there will be a different outcome? Nunes, I think, is just better than Cyborg. I think she would have beaten her regardless. Cyborg may have underestimated Nunes a bit because Nunes was smaller, fighting at a lower weight class, and gotten way too aggressive with their striking against her, but I think Nunes would have beaten Cyborg regardless. As for Conor versus Aldo, I think a rematch would have been closer, but with the build-up of the first fight, with all the trash talk and mind games from Conor McGregor, with how well he knew Jose Aldo's technique, I think Conor would have beaten Aldo regardless, though. Maybe not the first left hand to land or, you know, nothing like that, but I think eventually he would have knocked out Jose Aldo. in a rematch. But Aldo would have landed a lot more leg kicks, maybe attempted a couple takedowns, landed some few good punches on Conor. But I think the punching exchanges between the two would always favor Conor McGregor and actually run the risk of Aldo getting knocked out with every one of those exchanges. Just with the way that Aldo is aggressive with his boxing, it plays very well into getting knocked out by Conor's style. And the final question, we're going to go with Kenzo Tenma. Thoughts on Dustin saying Islam will beat Arman by out-grappling him. Even he said Islam will outstrike and outbox Arman because Islam has cleaner and slicker boxing. He said this on the DC Chill Son and Good Guy, Bad Guy show for International Fight Week. Also, do you think Dustin admitting this about Islam's boxing and striking proves Dustin acknowledges him, or he acknowledges himself of getting outboxed and outstruck by Islam Makhachev? I don't know if he was saying that he was losing the striking exchanges against Islam, but I think he believes that Islam is better in that area than Arman Tsarukyan, which I agree as well. I don't think Islam needs to wrestle with Arman to beat him. In fact, if he wrestles with Arman, he would make the fight harder on himself because that's where Arman is at his strongest. Arman's stand-up is a lot more wild and he relies more on his explosiveness than his actual boxing technique or kicking technique to beat his opponent. I mean, he got rocked by Joaquim Silva. Islam would never get rocked by Joaquim Silva in his prime. Maybe out of his prime when he got knocked out by Adriano Martins, but a prime Islam is not getting stunned by Joaquim Silva. That is not happening to Islam Makhachev. And that is ultimately the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give this video a like, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.